I'm Ambalika Guha, and I teach in the Department of English Language and Literature at Adamas University. So today, our topic of discussion will be Introduction to Language Acquisition Theories. What we are planning here, we are planning to fold into 5 lectures, and all the 5 lectures will be on language acquisition. And today we are going to have an introductory discussion on language acquisition. So, the first question that comes to our mind whenever we are thinking about language acquisition is that uh, how do children acquire the knowledge of language? Or maybe even we can think about that the kind of knowledge that a child has about language, what kind of knowledge is that? What does that knowledge indicate? So I'll start by reading a few quotations and with which we will going to have a discussion. So Clark in the year of 2004 says that children seem to understand early on that language reflects the speaker's intentions about how to view objects. Now, if we read this line, what comes a little clear to us that language as a system is a little complicated in structure. Okay. And because we know that when we are trying to explain something in the terms of language, try to represent something in the terms of language, here we enter into a very complicated systematic structure. So a child within the age of 2 years or 3 years captures this entire representational system. And here comes the question: how does it happen? Even if you look into the Lightfoot's quotation, where Lightfoot is saying that children master a rich system of knowledge, and here we are talking about language, the natural language, a rich system of knowledge without significant instruction and despite a deficiency of experiential learning or experiential data. The main question is how children acquire so much more than they experience. So, indeed, the kind of knowledge of language that a child acquires within the period of, let's say, 3 years of their age, that is remarkable. And nobody from the surrounding is, it's like giving a very forceful instruction. It's like it does not happen like the learning process. So it's like when we're talking about a learning process, there's a particular setup in which an instructor gives us the command of how to follow rule system of a particular language, and that is how we keep on learning that language. But when we're thinking about acquisition which happens in a very natural process, where the child is not even aware that the child is developing the knowledge of that language, and this happens without any direct instruction. And we're talking even here, Lightfoot and many others, they have spoken about that there is a deficiency in the experiential data which the child receives. The input data is not very perfect, and there are a lot of lack in it. So with the kind of input data that the child receives, the child produces a remarkable set of knowledge of a particular language. And how is that possible? That is also a question to us. Even Clark, again, in the year 2003, Clark, while trying to explain about language acquisition, makes a comment like children can build on pre existing notions of what to represent with language, as well as prior notions of communication, or they could start from nothing and discover what it is and isn't represent in language. So here we can have two approaches. One where we can claim that a child already has a pre-existing system or a notion of what to represent through languages, Or maybe we can also say that the child had no pre-existing notion. It just starts as a very blank slate, and the child keeps on discovering everything from the environment, whatever comes to the child as an input data. Whatever the case is, the point is that here we are talking about children acquiring a language, and that knowledge of language uh, in a very perfect manner within the age of 3 years of old. And that particular language is very complex in structure. Not only it is complex, it is also rule governed. So so this is like a very big question, that what is making it possible that a child is developing knowledge of language, the language which is rule governed, and the rule that we are talking about, it indicates very complicated structure of any language. So what is making this possible for a child to develop language in such a remarkable fashion? Now, with this comes the next question, that is the knowledge that we are talking about, like the source of this knowledge. Is the source of this knowledge innate? Is it like the case that a child is born with some kind of innate ability which is helping the child to develop the knowledge of language? Or is it empirical? Or is it something like that the child is developing that knowledge of language from the environment, like from the outside force? Okay. So, for several years, there have been study on the process of child language acquisition, and we have two very important theories working here. One is the empiricist, and another one would be the rationalist. So empiricists have made this claim that the knowledge of language that a child acquires, uh, it comes as a product of experience. So as if like the child is the child is exposed to the environment, and from the environment the child is gathering the language data, and based on that, not only gathering the language data, also going into an interaction with the social uh, the social data that we have in the environment. So the child gets into an interaction with the society, which behaves as an environment, and from there, the child is developing the knowledge of language. Rationalists, on the other hand, would say that this knowledge of language is not completely based on the experience the child is getting from the environment. It is partly innate as well. So as if like a child is born with some kind of rule system which is giving the ability to the child to understand the knowledge of language, to develop it, and then to use it. We are going to have a detailed discussion on it gradually when we move ahead with our other units. But here we'll try to just have a brief introduction of language acquisition. So when we're talking about empiricists as well as rationalists, and that comes, I mean, that actually brings us to very extreme positions of language acquisition. One is behaviorism, another one is nativism. So when we're talking about behaviorism, B.S. Skinner and his team, they have explained that all kinds of behavior uh, that can be developed through the process of stimulus and response. And we have the environment, which is conditioning the habit formation process. And when Skinner and his team, they were talking about that all kinds of behaviors that can be conditioned through the stimulus response, they also spoke about linguistic behavior. And to them, linguistic behavior is almost as the same as the other kind of behavior, and it is also developed through the stimulus response process, according to the behaviorists. Whereas, on the other hand, nativism or the nativist, they claim that it is not just happens the case that through the stimulus response process that the child develops the knowledge of language or even the linguistic behavior. It is somewhere, it's like an innate part of a child which helps the child to develop the linguistic behavior besides the experiential learning that the child goes through. Now, since we are talking about the two extreme approaches like behaviorism and nativism, here also comes the another theory, which is cognitivism. So, cognitivists would suggest that we are talking about the development of language, the knowledge of language, and this knowledge of language somehow goes parallelly, hand in hand with the development of other cognitive abilities. So, according to the cognitivists, a child develops the concept first, and then comes the usage of that language. So, for example, an experiment was conducted where it was shown that children were given a number of sticks, and the sticks are of different sizes. And children who can arrange those sticks according to the size, those children could understand the degrees of comparative of adjectives. But the children who could not arrange it according to the size, they had difficulty in understanding the degrees of comparatives of adjectives. So here, what they're trying to claim that the concept gets built first, and then comes the language knowledge. On the other hand, we have the interactionist, who would suggest that um, it is, I mean, the knowledge of language simply does not come from the some kind of innate device, or it is just not only the experiential that we have, or it is just not only the cognitive abilities which gets developed and then language gets developed. It also happens that the child constantly needs to be in an interactive environment. So whatever the child gets as an input data, or the child receives as an input data, the child has to go on responding to it. So it is like kind of like a turn taking process, and through that process a child develops the language, and here we're talking about the first language. Now that we are somewhere in the understanding of language acquisition, so there also comes the question of the biological evolution of language. So, do we have any evidence that language? I mean, somehow there are parts which indicates that language exists biologically in human beings. And Bhatt and Kormukar, and they have done a very wonderful project in IIT Kanpur, where they have mentioned that how language is a biological capacity as well as a cultural invention. Now, if you're thinking about like the structure of our brain, here we have like we can start with the reptilian brain, which indicates that like we are very much in like our behavior is controlled by our intuition. And on the other hand, when we are thinking about that how reptilian brain gets evolved into a mammalian brain, the our behavior that gets controlled by intuition, that gets modified by experience. So in the reptilian brain, um, suggests that our behavior can be controlled by intuition. But when the reptilian brain gets evolved into the mammalian brain, Here, our intuitive behavior, they get modified by the experience that we have. And from the mammalian brain, it gets evolved to the neocortex, which gets transferred into this human brain. And here we have uh, two hemispheres now, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So if you're talking about the right hemisphere, helps in communicating using images. Left hemisphere, on the other hand, helps in communicating using words. So left hemisphere has, it is highly developed for the verbal ability. On the other hand, right hemisphere is highly developed for spatial abilities. Now, not only this, like if you're talking about the left hemisphere as well as the right hemisphere, so left hemisphere would control the logical and the systematic aspect of behavior of a human. It will it will guide you through rationality, through principles. um, on the other hand, the right hemisphere is much more controlled by intuitive and imaginative behavior. And the right hemisphere, even through, I mean, it captures the experiences through which emotions also get controlled. So, in the left hemisphere, we have the Broca's and the Wernicke's area when we're talking about like the particular position of language, because through this Broca's and Wernicke's area, the language ability gets much more uh, explicit. So through the Broca's and Wernicke's area, it helps a child to develop. I mean, receive the language data as well as produce it or use it. So if there is any damage that gets done to the left hemisphere of our brain, it has a direct impact on the language. Not only the brain structure, also if you think about the way our speech organs have been evolved, like if you think about our lips, the tongue, the palates, the vocal cords, the epiglottis, everything, the way the entire structure of the speech organ, it has evolved, or it has been shaped gradually. It indicates that we can emit like number of speech sounds, which we are capable of emitting those number of speech sounds. So through the shape of our lips, through the position of our tongue, we have that ability of producing speech sounds, which is much more in number compared to the animals. So going back again to like whatever we have discussed so far, is that we try to address the first question that comes when we think about language acquisition. Here I should mention, which I think I have already mentioned earlier, that acquisition and learning, they are different concepts. So if you're thinking about language learning, it actually happens in a much more instructive manner. Okay, but if you're talking about acquisition, it happens in a very natural process where the child is not even aware that the child has developed a wonderful level of knowledge of language. So the question that comes to our mind when we think about language acquisition, that how does this process, how is it possible, and what makes language acquisition possible in a child? And that brings us again to the understanding of the very complicated structure of language. So when we think about language, like what does language does? So if we think that in language we have words, we have phrases, we have sentences, What are they trying to do? They are like every word that we have, or phrases or sentences that we have, they represent some concept, they represent some ideas, right? So this representation system is not very simple, because the this representation system, it is rule governed, and that rule governed structure is it's quite complicated. And we're saying that a child develops this entire rule system within a period of 3 years of age, and this happens without any formal instruction. Like, it is not the case that somebody sits around the child and trains the child of 1 year of age, or maybe of 2 year of age, that like with proper pen, pencil, or on the board, that these are the rules of your native language. This is what you're supposed to these are the rules that you're supposed to follow. These are the rules where you have restrictions. No, nobody is teaching the child in a very direct, instructive manner that what the child is supposed to do uh, in his or her language. But still, without that instruction, the child develops that very rich knowledge system of language. And whenever we're thinking about that particular knowledge system, here comes again to our mind that what is the source of that knowledge system? Is that uh, is this knowledge of language completely directed from our experience? So whatever input language data our brain is receiving from the environment, from the external source, we are somehow processing it, and we keep on producing that same data, whatever we are receiving. And on the so here, when we're talking about this kind of source of knowledge system, here comes the role of the empiricists. So empiricists would claim that the knowledge of language is the product of experience. And on the other hand, if you think about the other source of knowledge, it can be both, like the part of experience from the external source, as well as it can be some kind of innate property of a child. So it's like a way of saying that the child is born with some kind of innate property, which is enabling the child to develop the knowledge, that very complex and rule governed knowledge of language. uh, here I should mention that when we are talking about the external environment, the kind of data that we get from the external environment, definitely that is huge. Okay, so what is marvelous is that a child uh, does not keep on always imitating what the kind of data that the child gets from the environment. So it's not like the case that the child hears something from the caregiver, and or maybe anybody from the environment, and the child just goes on parroting it, or repeating it word by word. uh, just the sentence construction has been put by the environment, the child also says that. The beautiful thing is that the child can keep on creating or uttering novel sentences. Okay. And every time the child speaks, there are some kind of new sentences that come into role. So what is it that making it possible? Is it always possible that because whatever the child is hearing from the environment, the child is memorizing it, and that seeing it, that is really not the case. So here the rationalists would claim that the child has developed the rule system of the language that the child is receiving as an input data. And based on that rule system, the child keeps on generating new sentences or new constructions. So the two very opposite, I mean, the extreme approaches in language acquisition, as we have already discussed, behaviorists, and on the other hand, the nativists. So behaviorists would just claim that all kinds of behaviors, including the linguistic behavior that we have, it gets conditioned by the stimulus from the environment. Based on that, the child gives keeps on giving the response, and the stimulus response behavior can be conditioned as well. Whereas the nativists would claim that, just to repeat it, what we have been discussing so far, that the stimulus response is somehow also guided by some kind of innate knowledge, and it is not only from the environment. We'll have a very detailed discussion of it when we proceed through our modules. And the other very important approaches to language acquisition, one would be cognitivism, and the other one would be interactionism, where cognitivists would claim that the concepts, I mean, whatever the child is representing through the language. So here the child represents the concepts, the ideas, right? So these concepts and ideas get built first, and then the child uses the language to represent those concepts. So interactionists would suggest that, fine, building concepts is good, environment also plays a role, and there is some kind of innate property which is also uh, enabling the child to develop the knowledge of language, but it somehow gets incomplete if the child does not get into an interactive environment. It is not just the case that the child keeps on hearing the language data, and later on the child keeps on producing whatever the data the child received. The child has to go into a turn taking kind of conversation. So if the caregiver says something or maybe question something, the child has to respond. And the moment the child responds, even the caregiver or anybody in the surrounding, they have to again respond back to the child. So through this turn taking process, children develop the knowledge of language. That is what interactionists would have to say. And we have also somehow had a very brief understanding of the biological capacity of language. So we are thinking about, this biological capacity, it is universal. It is like in every human being. And besides this biological capacity, also there is cultural invention of language. So yes, indeed, maybe we can, I mean, we can say that we have this innate language property, which is a biological capacity. But if we do not have the language data from the immediate society where we live in, so it is very much guided by our societal principles as well. So language, we can say that it is both the biological capacity as well as the societal cultural intervention. And with this, we have also tried to understand that the human brain has also evolved in number of stages. So, started with like a reptilian brain, which indicates that knowledge is just guided by our intuition, or maybe our behavior. Instead of saying knowledge, it's better to say behavior. Like, and our behavior is controlled by intuition. And when this reptilian brain gets evolved into a mammalian brain, here we can say that the behavior which is guided by intuition, that gets modified with the experiences that one receives from the environment. And finally, this mammalian brain gets evolved into the human brain, which is like the neocortex we are talking about. And here we have two hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So the right hemisphere, helps us in communicating using images, whereas the left hemisphere helps us in communicating using words. So a right hemisphere gives us more ability in understanding the spatial concepts, and the left hemisphere gives us the verbal ability. And left hemisphere also guides us through logical thinking, systematic thinking, whereas right hemisphere, on the other hand, uh, it is much more intuitive in its characteristic, and our emotion also gets controlled through experiences, and that is also controlled by the right hemisphere. So besides the structure of the brain, our speech organs like the lips, the tongue, the palate, epiglottis, vocal cords, everything has been developed through the stages of evolution. And the way the speech organs have been developed, it also helps us in emitting uh, in I mean, infinite number of sounds. We can emit more sounds than any other animal. So, with this, I would like to end the very brief introduction to language acquisition and what we are going to follow in the next few lectures. So, we are going to discuss behaviorism in a very detailed format in the next lecture. The third lecture will be on the innateness hypothesis, and the fourth lecture will be on cognitivism. And finally, we are going to see that what kind of differences we find when we are talking about language acquisition and language learning. So, can language learning be dealt in the same way the language acquisition happens? So, with this, we are going to have, we will try to understand the entire process of language acquisition. So, thank you for today. I'm going to end this lecture today. Thank you so much for attending.